لليمنيين بعد معاناة طويلة من الحرب، كما أنه سيشكل ركيزة صلبة للتباحث بالحل السياسي الشامل. لقد التقيت بوزير الخارجية الأردني في اليوم الأول التالي لتوليه منصبه، وقد عبر عن ترحيب بلاده باستضافة هذه الورشة، كما عبر عن استعداد المملكة الأردنية الهاشمية لتقديم أي دعم لمسار السلام ومساعدة الشعب اليمني، وهذا ليس بغريب عن بلد استضاف وقدم ملجأ آمنا وخدمة استشفائية أساسية لعدد كبير من مواطني الدول المجاورة ومنهم اليمنيين. وفي هذا السياق أرحب بتجاوب الحكومة اليمنية وموافقتها على إرسال ممثلها للمشاركة في هذه الدورة، وأتمنى على وفد أنصار الله والمؤتمر الشعبي العام تأكيد حضور ممثليهم. على الصعيد السياسي، دعا البيان الصادر عن اجتماع 18 ديسمبر في الرياض الأطراف إلى التعامل بشكل بناء مع مقترح الأمم المتحدة الذي عرضته على الأطراف تمهيدا لجولة المقبلة من المشاورات. لا زال لدى الأطراف بعض المخاوف والتحفظات، إلا أنني سأتابع مباحثاتي معهم لوضع حلول تساهم في تقريب وجهات النظر. إن هذا المقترح يرتكز بشكل كبير على أبرز ما تم التباحث فيه مشاورات الكويت، ويمهد الطريق لحل سياسي شامل يتماشى مع قرار مجلس الأمن 2216 والقرارات ذات الصلة، ومع مبادرة مجلس التعاون الخليجي وآليتها التنفيذية، وكذلك يشكل الخطوة الأولى على طريق السلام، ويمهد لمرحلة انتقالية بحسب مقررات الحوار الوطني. وقد لقي هذا المقترح دعما كاملا من المجتمع الدولي. بتشجيع من سلطنة عمان والولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، وافق وفد أنصار الله والمؤتمر الشعبي العام على خارطة الطريق كورقة عمل قابلة للبحث والتفاوض في شهر نوفمبر، وكان هذا مؤشرا إيجابيا. إلا أن امتناعهم عن تقديم أي طروحات عملية وعن وضع خطة مفصلة للترتيبات الأمنية تتطرق إلى تفاصيل الانسحاب العسكري وتسليم الأسلحة الثقيلة لم يساعد على التقدم، خاصة وأن الشق الأمني جوهري في المقترح وأساسي للسلام. وقد تحدثنا مفصلا في هذه المواضيع خلال زيارتي الأخيرة إلى صنعاء، ولا شك أن قرار أنصار الله والمؤتمر الشعبي العام بإنشاء حكومة موازية تابعة للمجلس السياسي الأعلى يضع عراقيل إضافية لمسار السلام، ويؤثر سلبا على عامل الثقة بين الأطراف. ولقد كررنا أكثر من مرة خطورة القرارات الأحادية في هذه الأوقات العصيبة وتأثيرها على إعادة تفعيل مؤسسات الدولة. أما الجانب الحكومي، فمنذ إفادتي الأخيرة إلى مجلس الأمن لقد قمت بزيارتين إلى عدن في ظروف أمنية صعبة وحساسة، وكانت آخرها في 16 من هذا الشهر الجاري، حيث التقيت برئيس الجمهورية عبد ربه منصور هادي ورئيس الوزراء أحمد عبيد بن دغر ووزير الخارجية عبد الملك المخلافي. لقد حثيت الرئيس هادي على الالتزام العلني بالمشاورات على أساس مقترحاتي التي قدمتها في الكويت وكذلك ما بعد الكويت. إن انتقاد الرئيس هادي المتواصل للمقترحات من دون القبول بمناقشتها لتعديل بنودها يقوض الثقة بمسار السلام ويطيل أمد الصراع. لقد أكدت للرئيس أن ما تقدمه الأمم المتحدة هو مقترحات قابلة للتباحث حتى نتوصل إلى حل شامل يقبل به الأطراف، وما من حل آخر يؤمن السلام لليمن ويجمع اليمنيين على طاولة واحدة للتطرق إلى التحديات الداخلية، وأبرزها قضية مظالم الجنوب. سيد الرئيس، يشهد اليمن حاليا تراجعا مستمرا على الصعيدين الاقتصادي والإنساني، فبحسب المنظمات الإنسانية هناك 18.8 مليون مواطن ومواطنة بحاجة لمساعدات إنسانية، و2.2 مليون طفل يعانون من سوء التغذية الحاد، وهذا المؤشر هو الأسوأ على صعيد العالم. الأسباب كثيرة ولا تقتصر على ارتفاع نسبة الفقر فقط، بل تشمل أيضا تراجع الخدمات الصحية والاستشفائية وعدم توفر المياه وغيرها من العوامل. وسوف يطلعكم منسق الشؤون الإنسانية زميلي ستيفان أوبراين بشكل موسع على تأثير الحرب على الوضع الإنساني. وفي هذا الصدد إن الإبقاء على مطار صنعاء الدولي مغلقا يزيد من صعوبة الوضع العام. فاليمنيون الذين هم بحاجة للسفر للعلاج غير قادرون على ذلك، وكذلك هي حال من هم في الخارج ويريدون العودة إلى بلادهم. كما أن الانتقال من وإلى مطار عدن ليس بالأمر السهل. وفي هذا السياق أحث الحكومة اليمنية على إعادة تفعيل حركة الطائرات المدنية والتجارية من وإلى مطار صنعاء الدولي، وأدعو جميع الأطراف إلى ضمان أمن وسلامة الملاحة الجوية والمطار. لقد أرسلت لكل من الأطراف رسالة رسمية لأخذ التدابير اللازمة لضمان أمن وسلامة مطار صنعاء. كما أن التأخر المتزايد لصرف رواتب الموظفين أثر بشكل كبير على قدرة اليمنيين الشرائية، ولا شك أن المماطلة في هذا الموضوع سوف تدفع المزيد من اليمنيين إلى حافة الفقر المدقع. من الضروري أن يعمل كل من الحكومة اليمنية والبنك المركزي وأنصار الله والمؤتمر الشعبي العام على ضمان استئناف صرف الرواتب على اليمنيين في جميع المحافظات. وقد وصلتني قبل هذا الاجتماع بساعات معلومات من الحكومة أنها قد باشرت بذلك. كذلك من الضروري وبالتعاون مع صندوق الأمم المتحدة للطفولة والبنك الدولي تمويل صندوق الضمان الاجتماعي حتى يتمكن من تزويد أكثر اليمنيين عوزا بالأموال النقدية. كما أشجع الشركاء الدوليين على تأمين الوصول إلى العملة الصعبة الضرورية لمستوردي المواد الأساسية حتى لا تتوقف عمليات الاستيراد. سيد الرئيس، لا شك أن اليمن يتخبط حاليا في دوامة من العنف والصراعات السياسية، إلا أن هناك ملامح واضحة للخروج من هذه الأزمة. إن المقترح الذي تقدمت به وإن كان يفرض بعض التنازلات إلا أنه يرتكز على متطلبات الطرفين ويأخذ بعين الاعتبار العوامل السياسية والأمنية والاجتماعية في البلاد، ويفسح المجال لمستقبل آمن لليمن واليمنيين. وسوف أقدم للأطراف جدولا مفصلا يعكس التسلسل الزمني بحسب تصورنا لأبرز المراحل السياسية والأمنية وتلاحقها، وأدعوهم إلى التحلي بالحكمة السياسية والمسؤولية الوطنية حتى نحقق التقدم الضروري بهذا الملف. منذ أن تقدمت بإحاطتي السابقة لمجلس الأمن لقد التقيت بوزراء الخارجية في المملكة العربية السعودية والإمارات العربية المتحدة وعمان والكويت وقطر والأردن والسويد. كما التقيت بنائب وزير خارجية روسيا والصين، ولمست الإجماع الدولي الداعم دائما لمسار السلام وجهود الأمم المتحدة. وفي هذا السياق أريد أن أشيد بالدعم الذي حصلت عليه من السفارة الروسية في صنعاء في آخر زيارة قمت بها لصنعاء. أرجو أن يكثف المجتمع الدولي جهوده للضغط على الأطراف لإعادة الالتزام بوقف الأعمال القتالية في الأيام المقبلة، وأنا على ثقة أن تحسن الوضع الأمني سوف يفسح المجال لتفعيل الحوار السياسي الذي نرجو أن يؤدي إلى حل جذري للحرب. أنا آتيكم مباشرة اليوم من صنعاء القلقة والحزينة، وتلمست عن قرب معاناة اليمنيين واليمنيات. آمل أن يفتح المسؤولون اليمنيون البصر والبصيرة ليروا حجم الكارثة التي أخذوا البلاد إليها، وأن يتخذوا القرار الجريء بالالتزام بالحل السياسي ووقف النزاع. إن حل المشكلة اليمنية لن يكون من أي جهة خارجية، فالأمم المتحدة تفاوض وتيسر والمجتمع الدولي يضغط ويسهل، إلا أن القرار يبقى قرار اليمنيين المعنيين بالنزاع وبقدرتهم على تقديم التنازلات وتحكيم الضمير السياسي، ومحكمة التاريخ لن ترحم. شكرا.
I thank Mr. Ould Sheikh Ahmed for his briefing, and I now give the floor to Mr. Stephen O'Brien.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President, and I thank the Special Envoy for his contribution. Since my last briefing, the humanitarian situation in Yemen has further deteriorated, while the armed conflict continues to intensify with daily airstrikes and armed clashes. In the last week, we received reports of at least 365 conflict-related security incidents, up from 231 the previous week, and at least 100 airstrikes alone in Taiz Governorate. During the last quarter of 2016, approximately 2,400 incidents consisting of airstrikes, armed clashes and shelling were reported throughout Yemen. This is a 12% increase from the previous 3 months. Today, I am particularly concerned about civilians caught up in the crossfire in Mokha, Taiz Governorate's coastal region. I have received reports that more than 5,000 families are fleeing. It is clear that in this fight, the most affected are the ordinary people, the ordinary Yemeni people who continue to suffer. Overall, more than 2/3 of the population, an alarming 18.8 million, as you've heard, is in need of humanitarian and protection assistance, including an astounding 10.3 million Yemenis who require immediate assistance to save or sustain their lives. This is about the size of the entire population of Sweden, and the numbers are rising. More than 2 million people are internally displaced. By the 31st of December, 7,469 Yemenis had been killed and 40,483 injured due to the conflict. The true number is likely to be higher as we only report cases by health facilities that are still functioning, a mere 45% of those. Overall, the plight of children remains grim, with a child under the age of 5 dying every 10 minutes of preventable causes. A grim illustration of the impact on children are the airstrikes 2 weeks ago near a petrol station next to a school in Sennar Governorate's Neem district that resulted in the death of 1 schoolgirl and injury to 4 others. A week earlier, on the 3rd of January, a school was completely destroyed in Saada Governorate's Safra district, reportedly and luckily without any child casualties. Since the hostilities began in March 2015, more than 1,400 children have been killed and over 2,140 injured. Another 1,441 children have been recruited by warring parties, some as young as 8 years old. The actual numbers are likely to be much higher. Beyond the direct casualties of the armed conflict, there are also the so-called silent deaths of Yemenis that go largely unnoticed and unrecorded. Girls, boys, women and men are dying of hunger and diseases that are easily preventable and treatable. Unfortunately, vital food commodities and medicines cannot be imported easily due to access restrictions imposed by all parties. People with chronic diseases, including high blood pressure and diabetes, who are not receiving life-saving treatment due to medical shortages, are slowly dying. The conflict in Yemen is now the primary driver of the largest food security emergency in the world. If there is no immediate action, famine is now a possible scenario for 2017. 14 million people are currently food insecure, of whom half are severely food insecure. This means that Yemenis are not able to feed themselves adequately and are frequently forced to miss meals and eat food with poor nutritional value. At least 2 million people need emergency food assistance to survive. Again, the situation for children is especially grave. 2.2 million babies, boys and girls, are acutely malnourished, and almost 500,000 children are suffering from severe acute malnutrition. This represents a 63% increase since late 2015. Children are going to bed hungry every night. Shockingly, incidents of gender-based violence have reportedly increased by over 63% before the conflict. As of this month, there have been 10,806 reported cases. To be clear, this means more rapes, more forced marriages, more child brides, and many more unspeakable acts of violence against girls and boys and women compared to 2 years ago. So, Mr. President, all parties to the conflict are failing to take precautions to spare civilians and civilian infrastructure. So far, the UN have verified over 325 attacks on schools, health facilities, markets, roads, bridges, and even water points. Over 2/3 of the damage to public infrastructure is a result of airstrikes. Violations of international humanitarian and human rights law continue unabated and largely with impunity. Attacks against hospitals, schools, and other protected civilian structures and facilities must stop immediately. International norms must be respected. Granting rapid and unimpeded humanitarian access is a key obligation under IHL. Yet people face major challenges in accessing humanitarian aid, and humanitarian actors face impediments to access people in need, including due to active fighting, insecurity, bureaucratic hurdles, and a lack of funding. The closure of Sana'a Airport to commercial flights since the 9th of August has a disproportionate impact on Yemen's civilians and further increases the humanitarian caseload. The lack of in-country specialist medical care means that more than 20,000 Yemenis are unable to seek treatment abroad. Similarly, life-saving medicines cannot be flown in. Students are unable to resume their studies abroad, and Yemenis outside the country are seeking to go home are unable to do so. In addition, the suspension of commercial flights has also meant that journalists can no longer travel to Sana'a and report on Yemen's grave humanitarian situation. We expect all parties to the conflict, including the government of Yemen, to do the utmost with the Saudi-led coalition to reopen the airport and airspace to commercial flights. This could include addressing security concerns through previously established flight routing through Bisha, Saudi Arabia, or other airports within the Saudi-led coalition. Mr. President, humanitarians now fill in for collapsing public institutions, which at this scale is both beyond our capacity and our remit. The healthcare system is in decline. Public infrastructure such as bridges, ports, as well as water and sanitation systems are being destroyed. The near collapse of the country's social security and economic institutions has multiplier effect on humanitarian needs. Yemen's poorest families, widows, orphans, people with disabilities, and the elderly are no longer receiving a monthly allowance of 2,500 riyals. That's about $10 per person. In addition, 1.25 million civil servants, including nurses, doctors, and teachers, do not receive salaries regularly. Yemen's middle class is growing poorer, and many are no longer able to provide for their families. While a batch of money arrived in Aden earlier this month, no information has been received whether it will reach civil servants in all governorates. Yemen's contracting economy, the associated liquidity crisis, and the continued depreciation of the local currency mean further hardship for Yemen's people. 90% of Yemen's food and fuel and almost all medical supplies are imported. Only 40% of pre-crisis amounts of fuel are now entering the country. Import restrictions are leading to price increases. For instance, in December, the price of wheat flour was 25% higher than in the pre-crisis period. Petroleum prices rose by more than 33%. Cooking gas is now 60% more expensive. The sharp decline in the central bank's foreign reserves, combined with its move to Aden and lack of liquidity, has a ruinous socio-economic impact. Yemen could run out of wheat within months unless traders can access lines of credit in the coming weeks. Foreign banks no longer accept financial transactions with many of Yemen's commercial banks. We must mobilize to sustain the traders' ability to import, replenish the country's stocks of staple food, and reverse the trend of growing food insecurity and potential starvation. In addition, some humanitarian organizations are struggling to find enough cash to implement projects. The end result is a country in economic distress, which is translating into acute humanitarian need. So, Mr. President, let me provide you with an update on the United Nations Verification and Inspection Mechanism, known as UNVIM. As of the 23rd of January this year, UNVIM has cleared 324 vessels from 394 requests. Since the beginning of operations, over 5 million metric tons of cargo has been discharged, including 2 million tons of food and just over 1 million tons of fuel. During this period, 54 vessels were not cleared. 20 vessel clearances were revoked, 28 cancelled, and 6 were declined. The mechanism has completed 21 inspections of suspicious cargo or information presented. Delays in receiving clearances are also due to restrictions imposed by the Saudi-led coalition, such as the hampering of vessels' access to Yemeni Red Sea ports, and in the absence of clear lists of prohibited items. Once goods are offloaded, there are often additional bureaucratic impediments that slow down the transport of commodities to their final destinations. All parties have to be held responsible for these impediments. Moreover, ports have been damaged and need to be repaired. Hodeidah Port, Yemen's main port through which 80% of imports arrive and which was damaged in the conflict in 2015, has not been rehabilitated. A vessel carrying 4 WFP-procured mobile cranes has arrived in the Red Sea, but has been ordered by the Saudi authorities to leave Yemeni waters and is now anchored 15 miles off Yemen's coast. The vessel is awaiting the coalition's approval to berth at the port. These cranes will boost the port's capacity in handling humanitarian cargo. 2 of the cranes will be used exclusively by the UN, by WFP, and help expedite the timely delivery of vital humanitarian aid supplies. In spite of the difficult conditions and tremendous challenges, the humanitarian community delivers. Together, in 2016, we reached 5.6 million Yemenis in need with direct assistance and via a coordinated response in 22 governorates. There are 5 operational hubs in Aden, Hodeidah, Ib, Sa'ada, and Sana'a. More than 114 humanitarian organizations are working in Yemen and are delivering life-saving and life-sustaining assistance across the entire country. In the darkness of conflict, there are some glimpses of hope. Thanks to the swift intervention by humanitarian partners who established 26 cholera treatment centers and launched a massive containment campaign through water and sanitation interventions, the cholera outbreak, which started in October, is now in decline. We must remain vigilant as there are still more than 18,000 suspected cases. In recent weeks, there have been some improvements in overcoming bureaucratic impediments, especially in terms of issuing visas to humanitarian workers. Dialogue is also becoming more effective in leading to a better understanding with parties to the conflict and their responsibilities under international humanitarian law. I welcome the efforts of the Saudi authorities and other partners to strengthen the dialogue and information sharing with humanitarian partners to overcome the challenges faced in the delivery of humanitarian assistance in Yemen. For 2017, approximately $2 billion is required to support the 2017 humanitarian response, targeting 10 million of the most vulnerable in Yemen. The increase compared to 2016 is directly tied to the breakdown of the socio-economic order, increased suffering in the absence of a cessation of hostilities and a political settlement. The parties to the conflict are closing their ears to the desperate pleas of the Yemeni people or the broad international community. I request Member States to pledge generously at the forthcoming Yemen Pledging Conference in late March. I conclude by requesting Council members to once again call for an immediate ceasefire and cessation of hostilities. The Yemeni people need a political solution to this horrendous conflict that they are caught up in. And I also request that Council members use their influence over the parties to the conflict to ensure that they respect international humanitarian law and to provide timely, full and unimpeded humanitarian access. And that secondly, they hold parties to the conflict accountable for breaching their obligation to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. Thirdly, to facilitate the increase of commercial imports of essential supplies, facilitate the import of cranes to Hodeidah and support the rehabilitation of the port, and extend UNVIM's mandate beyond April. And fourthly, demand the resumption of commercial flights to Sana'a. And fifthly, facilitate lines of credit for the purchase of staple food, including wheat, to traders and Yemeni banks. Urge the government of Yemen to use funds from the first batch of newly printed Yemeni riyals optimally, equitably, and without political bias, and to ensure that civil servants are paid throughout the country. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Bayan for his briefing. The representative of Uruguay has asked for the floor to make a statement. I'll give the floor to you.
Gracias, señor presidente. Agradecemos al enviado especial, señor Ismail Ould Sheikh Ahmed, y al secretario general adjunto